Chapter 1. The Deafening Silence. Ethan jolted awake to an unnatural quiet. The rhythmic hum of his farm's irrigation system, which usually served as his morning soundtrack, was gone. No buzzing, no clicking, just an eerie, unsettling silence. His stomach twisted as he rushed to the window, expecting to see the usual mist of sprinklers coating his crops in the soft golden light of dawn. Instead, he saw dry soil, motionless pipes, and his cattle pacing uneasily by the barn. Dread shot through him as he bolted outside, his boots kicking up dust on the way to the breaker box. His fingers fumbled with the metal latch, yanking it open. The switches were intact, no signs of tripped circuits. Then he spotted it, his power lines, slashed and dangling like limp vines from the poles, their raw edges exposed to the morning breeze. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this deliberately, and he already had a good idea who. His suspicions were confirmed when he stomped back toward the main road and spotted Laura Bennett standing on her porch, coffee in hand, wearing a smug little grin. Her oversized sunglasses barely hid the self-satisfied tilt of her face. "Morning, neighbor," she chirped, lifting her cup in a mock toast. Ethan's jaw clenched so hard it ached. "Did you do this?" he demanded, his voice razor-sharp. Laura widened her eyes in exaggerated innocence. "Do what?" He gestured to the mutilated power lines. "My farm runs on that power. My irrigation, my storage freezers, my entire livelihood depends on it. And someone," he pointed at the severed cables, "decided to take a pair of cutters and shut me down." Laura sipped her coffee leisurely, clearly enjoying his frustration. "Oh dear, that sounds terrible. But honestly, Ethan, those lines were such an eyesore. I did everyone a favor." His hands balled into fists. "A favor?" She tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "You know, it's a real shame about your little farm. But maybe you should have considered aesthetics before ruining the view for everyone else." Ethan could barely think straight over the roaring in his ears. He wasn't a violent man, but at that moment, he had to physically restrain himself from knocking that smirk right off her entitled face. Instead, he spun on his heel and stormed back toward his property, phone already in hand. He needed the power company. He needed legal action. He needed Laura to pay for this. Chapter 2. The consequences begin. It didn't take long for the consequences to start piling up. By midday, the sun bore down mercilessly, and his crops, already delicate from the recent heat wave, began wilting. His dairy products in storage were at risk of spoiling, and his animals, used to a steady water supply, started to show signs of agitation. Every passing hour without electricity meant financial losses stacking up like a bad poker hand. The power company arrived in the afternoon, their truck kicking up a cloud of dust as it rolled in. The technician took one look at the hacked-up lines and let out a low whistle. "Damn, someone really had it out for you," he muttered, adjusting his hard hat. "This ain't just vandalism. This is deliberate sabotage." Ethan crossed his arms, his jaw a hard line. "How soon can you fix it?" The man scratched his beard. "Normally, a week, maybe 2. But if you want an immediate fix, that'll run you about 15 grand. Special crew, rush job. You know the drill." Ethan's stomach sank. $15,000. He'd already budgeted tightly for the season, and dropping that kind of money overnight wasn't an option. He glanced back at Laura's house. She had caused this. She had to be held responsible. He wasn't about to let her get away with it. Not this time. Chapter 3. Gathering Evidence. Later that evening, after making a few calls, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, reviewing his security footage. He'd installed cameras around the farm after Laura had previously trespassed to complain about noise pollution from his generator. Sure enough, at around 3 a.m., the footage showed a figure sneaking along the fence line, bolt cutters in hand. The grainy night vision made details hard to catch, but the posture, the shape, it was unmistakably Laura. His blood boiled as he rewound the clip, watching again as she took her time positioning herself before slicing through the lines. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. This was premeditated. The next morning, Ethan walked straight into the sheriff's office, the footage loaded onto a USB. Sheriff Dawson, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned back in his chair as he watched the clip. When it ended, he let out a long breath and glanced at Ethan. "Well, I'll be damned," Dawson muttered. "That's some solid evidence you got there. So what happens now?" Ethan asked, arms crossed. Dawson sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Messing with power lines, that's a felony. Interfering with public utilities is serious business. She could be looking at a fine, maybe even jail time, depending on the judge. Ethan didn't flinch. Good. The sheriff studied him for a moment. You sure you want to go through with this? Lawsuits can get messy. Ethan's expression didn't waver. She cost me thousands. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she stood on her porch and smiled about it. Dawson let out a low chuckle. All right then, let's make her regret it. Chapter 4. The legal battle begins. By the afternoon, an official notice was delivered to Laura's door, informing her of the legal action against her. Ethan watched from a distance as she unfolded the paper, her expression shifting from amusement to irritation to outright panic. She whirled around, spotting Ethan standing by his truck. "Are you serious?" she shrieked, marching toward him, flailing the document like a battle flag. Ethan didn't even blink. "Dead serious. You can't do this." "I was just committing a felony," he cut in smoothly. "Yeah, that's exactly what you did." Her face turned a blotchy shade of red. "Oh, come on, Ethan. This is ridiculous. It's just some wires. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Try telling that to the judge," he said, nodding toward the sheriff's car parked by the road. Laura's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time since she'd moved in, she wasn't smirking. She wasn't condescending. She was panicked, and Ethan savored every second of it. By the time she stormed back inside, slamming her door hard enough to rattle the windows, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. He wasn't just going to win. He was going to make sure she paid for every single thing she had done. And if she thought she could weasel her way out of this, she had another thing coming. Chapter 5. The Courtroom Showdown. A week later, the court summons arrived. Laura's attempts to delay the case had failed, and she was officially on the hook for damages. But she wasn't done fighting yet. Word spread around town that she had hired a lawyer, some big-shot real estate attorney who probably had no experience in criminal or property damage cases. It was a last-ditch effort, and Ethan knew it. The night before the hearing, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, reviewing everything one last time. The surveillance footage, the recorded confession at the feed store, the power company's report, the property violation notice. Every single piece of evidence stacked against Laura. When he finally went to bed, he slept soundly for the first time in days. Tomorrow, the real fun would begin. The courtroom was packed. Small-town cases rarely drew this kind of crowd, but the whole town had heard about what Laura had done, and they wanted to see how it all played out. Ethan sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, his lawyer, Steve, flipping through a folder of meticulously organized evidence. Across the room, Laura was seated beside her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an overpriced suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She, on the other hand, had that same smug look on her face, as if she still believed she could talk her way out of this. The judge, an older man with years of no-nonsense experience, entered the room, and everyone stood. Once the proceedings began, Laura's lawyer tried to dismiss the case as a neighborly dispute blown out of proportion. He painted Ethan as an overreacting farmer who wanted to punish a woman for simply wanting a better view. Ethan remained silent, waiting for his turn. He had no doubt the facts would speak for themselves. Steve stood up, calmly but firmly laying out the case. He played the security footage, and the room went quiet. There was Laura, in the dead of night, bolt cutters in hand, deliberately slicing through the power lines. The smirk on her face was unmistakable, even in the grainy footage. Then came the recording from the feed store, Laura bragging about her actions, mocking Ethan's farm and loss of income. The look on her face shifted from smug to stunned. Laura jumped up, pointing a finger at Ethan. "That's taken out of context," she shrieked. "I was joking." The judge didn't even look at her. He turned to the power company representative, who confirmed the $15,000 repair bill. Then came the county inspector, explaining how Laura's fence encroached on Ethan's land. By the time Steve was finished, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Laura's lawyer tried to fight back, but it was useless. The judge leaned forward, hands clasped together, and stared at Laura. He reminded her that tampering with power lines wasn't just a minor infraction, it was a serious legal offense. She had knowingly damaged critical infrastructure, trespassed on private property, and showed no remorse. His ruling was swift and brutal. She was fined $50,000, ordered to cover all repair costs, and forced to remove her illegal fence immediately. Laura's jaw dropped. $50,000? You can't be serious, she wailed. I don't have that kind of money. The judge gave her a cold, unimpressed look. Then I suggest you find a way to pay. With that, he slammed the gavel, and it was over. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Ethan walked out of the courthouse with his head held high. Justice had been served, and for the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Laura, on the other hand, was fuming, ranting to anyone who would listen about how unfair the whole thing was. No one seemed to care. The town had seen her for what she was, and there was no sympathy left for her. Within a week, Laura put her house up for sale. She had no choice. The fine, combined with the lawsuit and legal fees, had drained her finances. Rumors spread that she tried to negotiate her way out of the payments, but no one was willing to help her. She had burned too many bridges. Ethan didn't see much of her after that, but he did get a good laugh when he heard that the person who bought her house was an engineer from the power company. Ironically, the new owner planned to install even more power lines, upgrading the infrastructure for the entire area. Laura had fought so hard to remove them, and now they were coming back stronger than ever. With the settlement money, Ethan made improvements to his farm. He installed solar panels, ensuring he would never be at the mercy of the power grid again. He reinforced his fencing, added security cameras, and even expanded his operations. What started as a disaster had turned into an opportunity, and he wasn't going to waste it. The final time Ethan saw Laura was the day she left town. He happened to be driving by when she was loading the last of her things into a moving truck. She caught his eye, and for a brief moment, she looked like she wanted to say something, an insult, a parting shot, maybe even an apology. But then she just huffed, turned away, and climbed into the truck. As she drove off, Ethan couldn't help but smile. He had won, and no matter where Laura ended up next, he had a feeling she wouldn't forget this lesson anytime soon. Epilogue: A New Beginning. Months later, Ethan stood on his porch, looking out over his thriving farm. The solar panels gleamed in the sunlight, and the new power lines stretched across the horizon, a testament to his resilience. The town had rallied around him, and the support he received had only strengthened his resolve to keep moving forward. Laura's house had been sold, and the new owner had indeed installed more power lines, much to the delight of the community. The upgrades had brought new opportunities for everyone, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far he had come. As he sipped his coffee, he thought about the lessons he had learned. Sometimes, life throws you a curveball, but it's how you respond that defines you. Ethan had faced adversity head-on, and in doing so, he had not only saved his farm but also secured a brighter future for himself and his community. And as for Laura? Well, she had learned a lesson too, one she would never forget. Actions have consequences, and in the end, justice always prevails. Ethan smiled as he turned back to his farm, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He had won the battle, but more importantly, he had won the war. And that was something no one could ever take away from him. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.